Greetings, everyone, and thank you so much for joining today's webinar. Today we have a very special guest that's going to be taking us through 3 things that we need to do to take our podcast to the next level. Lots of great information. It's going to be a really exciting conversation. But before we do that, I'm going to launch a poll because everybody loves taking a poll. So here we go. Give me just 1 second and we'll get it up and running. And here we go. So, as we get started today, we want to know, where are you in your podcasting journey? Are you just starting? Do you have a basic understanding but need a little bit more? You have some experience but you're looking for some advanced tips? Well, it looks like that second option got cut off. Apologies on that. Or are you an expert? Let's hear a little bit about you and where your experience level is. And while you are taking that poll, I'm going to go ahead and dive into the housekeeping. First of all, this webinar is being recorded and will be available for on-demand viewing. It usually takes us about a week or so to get it ready, but once it is, it will be available at shure.com/webinars. Once again, that is shure.com/webinars. And that is a great place to go for all of our past webinars. We have a ton of archive sessions across many audio topics. And it's also where you can go to see our upcoming sessions. So shure.com/webinars. Second of all, as we go through the session today, if you have any questions, please feel free to type those in the Q&A section, but be patient. We're going to be holding on questions until the end of the session. So it looks like we have a pretty good amount of polling of people that have taken the poll. We're over 80%. So I'm going to go ahead and show everybody the results here. All right, so it looks like we've got a lot of new people. So you guys and gals and people are all in the right place. And then we've got a mixed bag. No experts, but that's good. That's why you're here. All right, so let's close that poll, hide those results, and let's dive into the presentation. So let's meet our presenters. Laura, would you mind introducing and taking it away?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Cheryl. And Cheryl will be kind of popping in for some color commentary too, I hope, because we always have a blast when she does that. My name's Laura Clapp Davidson. I head up the market development team for retail here at Shure, meaning my team goes out and talks to people about our amazing products, podcasting, content creation. We do live streaming ourselves. I'm a podcaster and I'm a singer-songwriter. So, that's me, and that's my kind of take on podcasting and why we're going to be talking about that today. And I've been with Shure for just about 6 years. But joining me today, I'm so excited. I reached out to Elsie Escobar and I said, hey, I'm doing this webinar for work. I would love it if you would join me because you are an expert on all things podcasting. She is my guru. She has been podcasting since 2006, and she is the co-founder of an organization near and dear to my heart, a podcast called She Podcasts. And she also hosts the official Libsyn podcast, The Feed. So she knows, a couple, 2, 3 things about podcasting. So I thought that I would invite her to this party. So Elsie, thank you so much for joining us today.
You bet. I'm so excited to be here. This is going to be amazing. So glad to have so many beginners here. This is going to be great.
I know. I think that was such a pleasant surprise because for our top 3 things we're going to talk about, and we're going to talk about way more than 3 things, but this is just kind of our touchstones that we're going to come back to. So the first thing you want to think about, we're going to talk about leading with professional audio. Then we're going to talk about how to expand your reach if you've already got your podcast up and off the ground. And then putting those analytics to work. If you're using something like Libsyn, which is what I use, you can really dig into the data and start getting your message heard and seen a little bit more if you take a look at some of those numbers. So Elsie's going to go through that for us. So let's jump right in. Let's start with number 1. I mean, we are an audio manufacturer, and so audio equipment manufacturer. Shure has been around since 1925. Just real quick, have to throw that out there because that's, a long time to be in this crazy industry. We make microphones. We make the lovely headphones that Elsie's wearing on her head. We make the earphones that I'm wearing here. And, we have been doing that for quite a few years. And what happens when you're using professional audio, if you are getting into podcasting, is you're already going to have a step ahead of some who are just, kind of starting at the beginning and maybe using whatever device they have made. You can produce a perfectly fine podcast on a device like a phone, but we have some things that you can keep in mind. If you're ready to get started and you're truly a beginner, you don't have to spend a ton of money, but you do want to invest in a microphone that's going to get your voice heard. And also ask yourself these questions that we've got up on the screen. Where are you going to be recording? Are you going to be like Elsie and I are in our offices? Are you going to be in a professional studio? Are you doing a podcast for work? So you're in more of a conferencing space. That is going to help decide whether or not you use something like the mics that we're both using, the MV7, which is what's called a dynamic mic that gives you directionality and focus and sound isolation that blocks out all the extraneous things that are happening in our room. Because Elsie, I don't know about you, but my room has hardwood floors, painted drywall, glass windows everywhere. What is your space like?
I actually do have carpet. So if I were to give a tip, I think carpet has been pretty big for me. But also I'm in my bedroom. I know it does not look like my bedroom, but it literally is my bedroom. And I have tons of my clothes. My bed is in front of me. And I do have a couple windows here as well. But I have the heater. The heater's on. This light above my head is making noise. Can you hear any of that stuff?
No.
I know.
I can't.
I can hear, but I can hear it. And so, yes, given that, I feel a dynamic mic like this, it is amazing for being able to work in spaces that aren't made for audio, if you will.
Right. And I mean, when you hear words like that, if you're tech averse and you hear dynamic and you're like, I don't know what that means. There are two main types of microphones that we consider when doing podcasting or live streaming: dynamic and condenser. Dynamic is a great microphone for blocking out extraneous sounds because of how it physically works. It has a diaphragm, a thin piece of material that's connected to a little wire that's surrounding a magnet. When you talk into it or sing into it or do anything into it, it vibrates the diaphragm, moves that coil around the magnet, and makes an electromagnetic field, which then converts your acoustic voice signature sound into an electrical signal and goes down to the mic or into the USB. So that being said, it takes a little bit of physical energy to get that to actually happen, whereas a condenser microphone, which you may have heard of and said, what the heck is that? That one is much more sensitive, and it's going to be able to pick up breath noises, nuances, details, which you want if you're in a well-treated space. If you're not, it's going to pick up the reflections of the room. So you can hear me right now. This room is naturally reverberant just based on these crazy angles that I have all around. But the dynamic microphone is naturally going to pick up less, and it's going to pick up what's directly in front of the mic. And that's something super important to take into consideration. Microphones are beautiful, but they're not intelligent creatures. Like, they don't reach out and listen to you. They are designed to pick up what is directly in front of them. So that's another point that we want to talk about. If you're solo or if you're a guest, get close to your microphone. Now, if you don't want it in your shot, there are some options you can use, like a lavalier microphone. We do not recommend using a shotgun microphone. A lot of people think that that is like a shotgun that's going to point like a magnifying glass. It won't. You're still going to hear room reflections. If you want to have that close professional podcasting broadcast sound, use a dynamic microphone and get it close to your mouth. But what do we do to avoid plosives, Elsie? I've told you this before and you're doing it.
I know. Sometimes placing it slightly away from, not directly in front of your mouth, because of the sounds that you make. So this actually makes me, with the plosives and the S's, because my tongue makes the S sound that's very catchy. I still am like, oh. So, but if I had it this way, it would be so much, I can already hear it. If it was straight into my face, I'd be spitting in it. You'd hear the spit come into it. So having it inside a dress like this, to me, just a little bit there, it just helps me sound pretty good, right? And
it sounds great. Yes.
Yeah. My face is seen, feels comfortable.
Which is nice. Yeah. I mean, you don't have to have it out of your camera shot. Like, there's something that lends to this kind of experience. But so get close to the mic, use a dynamic mic if you're not in a treated space. And there are several options out there. What we're using right now, you're using the MV7X, yes? Or are you using the MV7?
I am using the MV7X, correct. Okay. The MV7 is back there.
Oh, I see her. She's cute back there. Okay, so the MV7, which is what I'm using, is a USB and XLR microphone. So you can plug that directly into your computer or into your phone if you want. I take this on the road all the time. I plug it into my MacBook Pro, which I'm using right now. And this is all I need. I also have a set of headphones, which we're going to talk about the importance of that in a second. So this is a USB or XLR, meaning I can go into my computer or I can go into an interface, which is what that third bullet on the slide is telling you. Audio interface versus USB microphones. If you're just starting out, don't go crazy. Just get something like an MV7 where you plug directly into your computer, plug in a set of headphones to monitor yourself. That's all you need. You don't need to get crazy and fancy. But to bullet point number 2, if you're having guests like Elsie often does in her line of work, although I think mostly remote, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Then you'd want to go with XLR microphones. And XLR just refers to the connector type, which looks like this, which you've probably seen before. Then you want to go with something that can go into an interface, because an interface just allows you to have more microphones going into one source that you then plug into your computer to start getting up and running. So that's what you need to consider. Is it just me? Great. I'll stick with a USB XLR hybrid so it can grow with me. Or I know that I'm going to have guests, so I need to get into something that is XLR compatible, and traditionally an audio interface is the best way to go with that.
Yeah, and to mention, I've seen a lot of people now doing a lot of video podcasting and a lot of work with, you see those people where they're doing those podcasts where they're sitting on couches with the big tripod things and looking at each other. If you want to do that, if you have a co-host in real life with you, next to you, you need to have an XLR microphone that goes into an audio interface. And just like Laura said, the audio interface goes into the computer, because you cannot do that with USB mics.
Well, you can, but it's a pain in the.
It's a pain, yeah, and that's why I was gonna say that, but it's too complicated to even say it. People keep asking, and yes, you could literally cobble all kinds of solutions together, but it's just so much easier to have an audio interface for you to be able to do that.
Right.
Yeah.
So just you, USB will work. More than just you, XLR is the way to go. And an audio interface can be anything from this wonderful device, our MVX2U, just a single inline, single channel interface that lets me plug in an analog dynamic microphone and convert it into a digital signal that goes into my computer because it's got USB-C on there. That's an audio interface. It doesn't have to be a box that sits on the table. That's just what we, kind of tend to think of. But if you've heard of other brands, Focusrite and Apogee and PreSonus, and we got all these interfaces that are out there. Don't get overwhelmed. Don't break the bank, but invest enough in yourself to make sure that you have gear that's going to work for you and not fight with you when you're ready to start getting up and going. Right, Elsie? We've all done that by twice.
By twice, yes. But I would say, there's another, and I'm only mentioning this because I now have the privilege of having one place where I record, but I've been doing this now for coming up on 18 years in 2024, which is nuts.
That's amazing.
And I've never, until the pandemic, had a studio setup, because I was always on the go. I was always moving. I was podcasting on the bed. I was in a hotel. I was in a different house. I was like on vacation. I continued to put episodes out every single week. And so mobility is so important to me, being able to do that versus this, because I couldn't really do this until now. So my most favorite, it's actually, I think my favorite tool of 2023 people is the MV88 Plus video kit.
Oh, you're the best.
Do you have that around there? Because you have to show that. I should have grabbed it.
The mic. I don't have my little Pixie tripod because it's currently doing something else right now. But yes,
that little guy right there. And I'm not even saying this because I'm here with Shure microphones, and yes, I'm talking about a Shure product, but I cannot tell you what that little thing has done for my ability to record from literally anywhere and sound amazing. I've had to record podcast interviews that I'm a part of. I generally don't do my own podcast. There's been a couple of times when I've had to, just because I it's my schedule. I make my schedule work for me. But if I'm a guest on something else, or I've had to show up, then there's been times when I haven't been able to do. Oh, thank you so much. Yeah. I carry that with me in my backpack It's
Yes.
as light as for any of the makeup wearers out there that are there. It literally rolls up into a little bundle that looks like makeup brushes, and it's
Yeah.
less than a pound. I think it's so light. It's so
It's
light.
very
And
light.
so I stick it in my backpack, take it with me everywhere, take it out, and in a second, I have the best quality sound. And I've recorded usually outside of a Whole Foods because we tend to go there all the time. So outside of a Whole
It's a good
Foods,
place to
right
go.
in front of the parking lot with cars moving back and forth, carts being pushed right next to it. And I'm
Yeah.
always like cringing, going, oh my God, that's going to sound so bad. And it doesn't.
Right.
I'm
And
just,
that's something cool to think about and mention too, is that you have when you look at your microphone options, you need to think about flexibility, or think
yes.
about what you need this mic to do for you. If you're
Yep.
lucky like Elsie and I are, and you have this ability to have a setup that you can keep set up all the time, great. Go with a
Mhm.
boom arm. That's what this thing is called. Go with a boom arm, go with a microphone that's mounted there, and you can have options. But if you want to have a microphone that literally has options, that is the benefit of the MV88 Plus, because it has this cool app that allows you to control the microphone. So if you were in the Whole Foods parking lot, you could put it into this mode here, which is cardioid mode, which is going to block out sounds coming from the rear of the mic and focus in on the
Mhm.
source. Okay. But then if you're out in front of Whole Foods and you're like, oh my gosh, that person I've been wanting to interview is here, you can switch it to figure 8 mode, which operates this, because this is a stereo microphone. It's going to operate both capsules of the mic. So I could put it in between myself and my interview subject and be picking us up equally without having to hand a microphone back and forth. So it's very versatile. It's lightweight. But this is not a sales pitch. We want to give you the right solution, but we're telling you there's options. Okay.
Yeah.
Think about your options so that you're not just impulse buying something that's inexpensive where you say, I just need a mic. Think about where you want your podcast to go, which can take us to the next slide, which is talking about how to expand your reach. Once you've started recording, you've gotten your, oh, sorry, I skipped a slide. We'll go to production and post. So once you've started that, where does it go? But after that, once you've taken that into consideration, you have your products, you're lined up, you start, recording. There's all these other things that can get into the mix, which if you take advantage of them and take a step back and take a minute to learn what these things do, it's also going to make the technical lift much, much lighter. So denoising, I can't praise this plugin enough. Elsie, do you have a favorite one that you use?
I actually set up my hardware for that so that the Rodecaster Pro that I have behind me, I did spend time setting those things up so that so I'm getting the best raw footage as possible from the get-go.
Nice.
So I don't have to really worry about the denoising capabilities. But I don't have a favorite one, simply because I haven't had to use one as of late. And there's
Good
so
for
much,
you.
so many
That's
other
awesome.
tools that have come up. So, but anyway, go.
Yeah, I mean, because that.
I think we lost Laura. Laura, can you hear us?
Okay.
Laura.
For me, and there's a ton out
Hey,
there. If you Google
Laura?
denoiser.
Laura, you went out audio. Your audio went out for like a little bit there, so you might want to back up and repeat what you just said.
Okay.
Did you denoise
Can
your
you hear
own
me now?
voice?
Yes. Wow. I didn't even touch anything. That's fun times. Okay. All right. So I use the denoiser plugin called Hush. Did you guys hear that?
Now we did. Hush.
Okay.
Yes. You were
Hush.
denoised.
I was
Hence
so
the
denoised.
voice. You were so
Okay.
denoised we couldn't even hear you.
Yes, I'm not even using it right now. But anyway, it is a post-production plugin that you can use where you drop your audio file into it and it removes the noise through AI. So that's just one. There's many out there. So you can Google
I have to
denoising.
write that down.
Because if you are, it's great. If you're working in a space where you have HVAC running like we all do, or you just have like a low level fan, like my computer sounds like it's about to catch on fire pretty much all the time because all the stuff that I'm demanding of it. So that denoiser just takes that out and just gives you that perfect vocal track that you want. And then I just drop that back into my DAW, my digital audio workstation, and go from there. But, if you have a great hardware setup, like Elsie's saying, that's great. Get it good to go on the front end. And then you won't have to worry about it. But if you do, you can denoise that way.
Yeah, and there's a lot of the DAWs. Speaking of the digital audio workstation, there's a lot. The way that I often tell folks that are just starting off, because it's a huge world to step into this kind of stuff. So first of all, get comfortable with understanding how to do the basic audio editing. And one of the ways to do that is most of us now learn all the things on YouTube. So start with the free. You can use something like Audacity and search for Audacity tutorials on YouTube for whatever you're trying to do. Audacity tutorial on taking the music down. Whatever comes out of your mouth. Don't try to think about the terms exactly.
Right.
Something, whatever you want to do, because that's the best way to learn. You'll understand how to say these things. Like ducking, you're never going to know. Like when you're a beginner, you're not going to be like, I have to figure out how to do audio ducking, because they don't, what the heck even is that, right? You wouldn't know that. So just say, how do you take my music down on Audacity, which is while I'm talking on Audacity, that kind of stuff. How to merge sounds together in Audacity, things like that. And then start to watch that. And the reason I'm using Audacity is because there is a fairly large community around that DAW that is active and helps people out. And it's also open source and it's free. Now, once you learn something like Audacity or you get used to the terms, you'll understand, oh gosh, I can apply what I learned in any other DAW that might, you're going to be investing on, right? So you'll never lose that knowledge and you'll learn the terms. And speaking of denoising, there is a denoiser in Audacity. And then if you look at tutorials and say, how do you use denoise in Audacity, you'll find that.
Yes, which is that second bullet there, podcast presets within your DAW. Yes. Especially something like Audacity, which is literally made for podcasting. It's going to have these things that are a little bit more user-friendly, as opposed to saying things like compression or de-essing or EQ, where people just glaze over and they're like, I don't know what that means. There are more user-friendly presets in there. Even if you're using something like GarageBand, which I do a ton when I'm on the road, there's one preset in there called narration vocal. And if you just pop that on there and pull down the reverb that they throw on there for some reason.
Yes, why do they do that?
I don't know. But I mean, that's in your Mac. So utilize it. You don't have to go crazy. You're already taking this beautiful idea that you love, that you want to share with the world. You don't want to complicate it with a ton of tech when you don't have to. But if you are some of those other people in the poll who already know all these things, you can throw into the chat, and we'll get to it later, what you are using, what your workflow is, because maybe we can share that with some others on the call, because that's the other thing. We get a little myopic when we're doing this, when we're podcasters. We're like, I love Hush. And people are like, I hate Hush. Who knows? But it's just to say the tech is out there. There are communities out there. Libsyn has a great community, which if you're not familiar with what Libsyn is, it is a platform that helps get your podcast out and distributed to all of the platforms in the world. All the places. Yeah. It hosts your podcast. It distributes your podcast. It tracks your podcast. Okay. So, and you can also hire an editor if you're super fancy. I'm not there yet. I like to do my editing, but that is an option for somebody who can't stand the sound of their voice or has no idea how to do the tech. There are freelance editors out there. So find them if that is what you would like to do. No judgment. Okay. Moving on to tip tactic number 2. I told you we're going to tell you a lot more than 3 things. That's just how we roll, right, Elsie?
Yes. AKA a bazillion other things about
a bazillion. Podcasts. I know we could talk for like 6 hours, but we'll keep it concise. Okay. So maximizing your podcast distribution, that's what we're going to talk about next. So we want to hit that next slide. So this is something that you need to check. If you're using something like Libsyn and they're distributing to the world at large, you want to make sure that something called your RSS feed is actually up and running. Can you tell people a little bit about that, Elsie?
I think that most folks, first of all, don't really ever have to look at their RSS feed, which is great. And so Libsyn, like Laura mentioned, hosts your podcast, which when there's a podcast host, and it's weird because you kind of want to also be a podcast host, right? So it's different than the human podcast host.
Yes.
It's the place that hosts your media files. Media host. That's it.
Yes.
Probably a better choice, but anyway, the media host. So your media goes up there, and then they create an RSS feed, right? Which is just a series of code that adds information to your feed. And once that RSS feed is full, meaning filled out, you submit it's a link essentially. It usually has a very readable, sometimes there's a lot of code to it too, but it ends with something like, /RSS and or .xml, and you copy or feed. Anyway, it ends up like that. And then you submit it to all the different places. Now, the information that goes in the feed is inside of the media host that you choose. And there's many people who did this, and there's lots of really great hosts. Libsyn is just one of them, but you choose in the same way that you would choose a microphone, you choose the thing that really gives you whatever you want. Most of us, though, give you the general results as of we distribute to all the places for you, which is very important.
Spotify, Apple Podcasts,
yes,
Google Podcasts. Those are the places.
Yes, those are the places. And we'll go into a little, some of them that are not quite there. But anyway, yes, to all the places like that. When you open up a podcast app, it's there. You open up a Spotify, it's there. That's what they facilitate. In the RSS feed, you have to add things like the title of your podcast. This is before you even launch, folks. The title of your podcast, the description of your podcast. You need to have a podcast artwork. You need to have, what else? That is another key. Oh, one thing you have to also, in order for you to submit it, you need to have a file published on your feed. So you can't get everything together and submit to the directories without publishing something to the feed. It's kind of like, if you have a blog post, you post that first blog post, it just goes out. That's what it is. My suggestion usually is for you to do a 60 to 120 second promo of your show, which is essentially saying, hey, this is, my fancy podcast. My fancy podcast is going to be talking to fancy people about fancy things, doing everything fancy that you've ever loved. And you talk about it and you publish it out. The end.
Brilliant. Yes.
You're ready. Nothing else. You don't have to do anything else. And you put that out there. Now, let's say, oh my God, what if you're like, I don't like that title. I need to change it. Not a problem. You go inside the podcast host, change the title, make it whatever you want. The description, not a problem. Change it up, do it, whatever. Your podcast artwork, oh my God, it's not perfect. Somebody else has something I want to do. You can change it up. So nothing that you publish is set in stone in a way that you can never change it again. So don't worry about that. Sometimes you can just put it out there and then spiff it up. In fact, we just did a whole rebrand for my podcast, The Feed, and we're slowly getting all our assets updated. And it's been the easiest thing ever. It's like the least of your troubles. So don't get caught up with the perfection of putting it out there.
Yeah, that's great. A great tip. And most of the time, if you are using a podcast host, media host, then you are going to be walked through that when you're first building it.
Absolutely.
Which is so handy, because I was like, I don't know what I'm doing when I was building mine, but it's like, what's the name of it? What's it about? Who owns it? Where do you want to distribute it? And, then you click it. And then that way, every time you post a new episode, it pulls from that RSS feed and updates it across all the platforms. But you just want to make sure that it's set up on the back end to get ready and distribute to all the outlets, because I had this happen with mine where it was indexing properly on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, and the artwork was always on point, like looking right. And then Google was like hanging out over here, not getting it. So I had to adjust my settings and just make sure that everything was pulling from that RSS feed. So
Yep.
that's
Let me
important.
just clarify one other thing too. There are, depending upon the podcast host that you choose, you might have, by the way, most podcast hosts have great support articles. So the first place you need to go when you have a question about it is to look at the support within that podcast host's team, because they'll have it. People ask these questions all the time. That said, there are certain podcast hosts where you do have to do like a couple of extra steps to get it to the other place, but you will see that. Within Libsyn, 99% of the destinations, which is what we call them, are built into the system itself. So you just set it all up in there. In the same way, I don't know, I'm sure that there's some of you who are listening right now who are possibly using third-party tools to post on social, and you have to add your Twitter account, and you have to add your Facebook, and you have to add your, all that things. So you add these things in there. That's kind of what destinations look like inside of Libsyn. There are all these little things, and you tap on them, and then you connect it to whatever that place is. And then once you do that connection, it literally is a check mark. Yes, I want it to be here, and boom, you're there. But you do have to go through that process one time. There are a couple of other places that you do have to go outside, but it's clearly stated for you to then go, okay, now I have to go these steps. And the tutorials are there for most podcast media hosts.
Yes, exactly. So that's kind of the initial lift of making sure everything's functioning properly. Now we want to move on and talk about my favorite word of 2022, 23, repurpose. Repurposing. We hear that a lot. It's a very big catchphrase, but it's so important and it's so easy when you start doing it. And Elsie's like the expert on this. She's a pro. I feel like I'm just like dipping my toe in, but what does repurposing mean to you, Elsie?
It means that this is how I'm trying to do this. I'm trying to save myself work. So now I spend a little bit of time thinking of how I can get it's the pre-production aspect of it. How can I get the majority of my information that I'm going to be covering out in as many different places as I can, and think through that process so that I don't have to reinvent the wheel. So repurposing what you say one time and getting it out into as many different places as I can in as many different digital ways as possible. Is that what you think about repurposing for 100%. Your content?
Well, yeah. And also just the simplest one too is if you're doing a podcast and it's audio only and you haven't explored the video side of it, that is something worth doing, because if you set that up, it adds another layer of editing to the process. But if you use something like Descript, which is what I use, you can record right within that app, edit within that app, pull just the audio out from within that app. And it even has some AI tools in there that haven't worked for me yet, but where you can generate YouTube descriptions and chapters and things like that. So if you haven't thought about using video because it's too daunting for you, know that there are platforms out there that are made to make your workflow very simple and approachable by keeping it all in one spot. So that's another kind of angle to repurposing is audio only, video, combine the two so that you can have snippets, you can have audio clips, and then you can have the video clips from your podcast, because there's all kinds of stats that Elsie knows all about in terms of how people are consuming their podcasts these days, and video podcasts are where it's at, right?
Yeah, video podcasts is an amazing other way to find more audience and reach as it pertains to marketing. So that is an angle that you need to think through from a variety of different ways. I have seen a lot more pickup, if you will, exposure to podcasts through, social short form video. As of now, the stats are still not there in terms of video podcasts are way much cool. Like, I guess they are cooler now. They're like the cool girl.
Right.
But they are not necessarily the things that are being consumed the most, which is
But it
Odd?
gets people to your podcast
It
more.
gets people to
Yes.
to be exposed to you and
Yeah.
want to listen to you and go, oh, wait, what is that? And then they'll go to these other places.
Right.
Correct.
So if you're already recording yourself talking to yourself
Yes.
or to others, as your podcast, consider adding video, because then you can make little clips, stories, reels, etc. And then that bullet point that's on there, the second one, Canva is a really unique tool. And we could do a whole webinar just on Canva, but that's a tool that lets you be a graphic designer. I'm just going to say that because I am abysmal at graphic design, and I go into Canva and I'm like, I am a genius.
I know.
My graphic designer friends are cringing and dying right now hearing me say this, but you can go in there. They have templates for podcast thumbnails, YouTube thumbnails, but resizing it, this is what's so cool. You can make your episode thumbnail and your artwork that Elsie was talking about. And then there's this magic button if you're in the pro level, and you just click resize, and it'll give you all these options. It'll be like YouTube thumbnail, Instagram story, Instagram post, Twitter post, whatever. And you click it and it just spits out this resized version of the artwork, and you didn't have to do anything. Maybe you have to do some minor tweaks. So all of this to say is that repurposing lightens the lift so that you can create more and worry about the technical side of it and the production side of it less. So make these tools kind of work to your advantage is my advice.
Yeah, it is. And I think that you do have a card here that is I don't know if it was about if it was before expanding your reach, or if this is expanding your reach. I can't remember.
Yeah.
But part of it is that you have to figure out that once you create, in order for you to figure out exactly what you need to repurpose and what works well, is you have to create your show, right?
Yes.
You cannot get caught up with the tools of what to do, how to do it. I need a transcript. I need to get a video thing. I need to get a thing. Like, you need to create your show, record your show, and then get a vibe. You have to vibe into what you're putting out there. Like, wow, that was really smart what I just said. Or that was really smart what Laura said. I need to have people listen to that clip. Like, if that starts to come into your mind, start to take notes, right? And then go, would that clip be best served as an Instagram, like, swipeable feed post, right? A text graphic. Great. Then you don't have to create anything else. Would that, did Laura and Elsie make funny faces? Maybe that would be a fantastic reel to be able to do that.
We never do that.
Cut that part. Right. I know, like, and so we'll do that. And you get an opportunity to start to think through how to repackage that to call as much attention to it and yet still reveal the content that you're putting out. So we're not here to tell you folks that you need to now cut it down into 3 reels. Make sure you have 3 Instagram feed posts. Break everything down into, threads posts. You need 3 a day. Like, that's a lot of work. And we really don't know if any of that works, in all honesty. And I'm not saying Laura and I don't know. The entire industry.
Yes.
Yeah, the larger we, the podcasting industry, is yet to figure out what actually works.
Yeah.
And guess who's going to do it? You're the one that's going to do that. But you have to do something. And then here's another part, and I think we're going to get this to soon. You have to start to write down some data around the actions that you take to promote your show and what works.
Yes.
Because if you don't do that, you won't know. You won't know what to do next. You have 0 information coming back at you.
Yeah.
Oh, look, we have a number 3. That was a great transition.
Good job out of you. Nice segue,
Thanks.
Elsie. You've done this
Thanks.
before. Yes. Yeah, because tactic number 3, analytics. What the heck are analytics? Well, analytics is data. Analytics are data? Analytics,
Yes.
I don't ever know the plural there. Basically, it's a way to know and measure and see who's listening to your podcast, where they're listening, when they're listening, demographic-wise, gender-wise, and when they're tuning in and tuning out. You can get really in the weeds there. So let's hop onto that next slide and say, a little bit more about that.
Yeah, I have. I wanted to, first of all, I actually have notes here because I have to make sure that I get some of these terms correct. It's simply because it's very hard to explain already to people. And even me, like I have to make sure that I have the right terms for some of this stuff, because you will never know. First of all, you will never know how many subscribers you have. I just want to tell you that out front. So if you have that question, just forget about it. You won't know that. Okay. No matter who tells you differently. I'm just telling you right now. There are services out there who are going to be talking about this. And there's actually people who are going to be like, well, you're listeners. And or you're like, they'll start to use all these terms that your watch hours and things like that, where you're just going to be like, what's happening? Okay. Doesn't matter. But here's the thing. These are the types of stats you're going to get. There's going to be server side stats, which are the stats that come into the media hosts platform, like
Right.
Libsyn, like Buzzsprout, like Acast, like Megaphone, like Transistor FM, like all of those are server side, meaning that's your media host. Okay. And then there are the client side stats. Those are the Apple,
Yep.
Google Podcast, Spotify. What's the difference? The media host is where you upload your file and they distribute the stuff out into the world. Those other places grab your file and play it for people. There are large platforms like Spotify, Google Podcasts, YouTube, and Apple Podcast that then take that information, and because they own the client, right? They own Apple Podcasts. They own Spotify. And then you put information about yourself to open up accounts in these places. They own that information, and they can tell you when people are consuming your podcast, how long they're consuming it, who, if you know what the demographic data is, where they're listening, all of that stuff. They can tell you that stuff, but it's in those places by themselves. And usually because they're fancy pants, they don't like to let the other people know that information. Everybody's
Right.
like, no, you will never see this. And
Not
so
for you.
not for you. So Apple Podcasts doesn't have any demographic information because they're privacy. They are very private focused and they are staunch. They give you listener, like how long people listen through, but only for people who are listening on Apple Podcast and on iTunes.
Yes.
That's it. Spotify does give you demographic information, but again, only stuff that's happening on Spotify. YouTube, same thing. Only stuff that's happening on YouTube. So you're never going to understand what the heck is happening. And then
you have to aggregate all of that data into one,
it would yes, that would be amazing. But alas,
yes,
that's not going to happen. They don't like to get along. So, I mean, they do get along, but everybody's like, no, my stuff is better than your stuff. And you have to come to use our stuff, not your stuff. So that's how it is. So you have to remember that. So you're never going to get anything like comprehensive that way. And then you're going to get the download numbers that sometimes some people call different things, like listens. But it's or progressive downloads. I mean, there's like all of these terms, and within every media host, there's different terms in the analytics when you're going to go in there, and they're going to have terms, and you're going to go, and some of them say subscribers too, and you're going to be like, wait, you told me I will never know my subscriber. Right. They are making these vocabulary terms in the UI to help you go, okay, that's a number that I need to pay attention to. So they'll call it subscriber, but that's a guesstimate of what could be coming in there based on the behavior of your media file being downloaded possibly to a device. It's not based on an actual human. So a download could be you, because you are obsessed with listening to Laura and Elsie's podcast, downloading us on your iPhone, and then you go to an iPad and you download that, and then we're streaming it on the Apple TV, and then you tell, then your kid, you're like, you have to listen to this, and
everywhere.
then your kid, that's like 4 or 5 in the household, and maybe it's just me listening.
Yeah.
So they don't discern difference. It's just a download. And it's a technical definition of what that is. So that you kind of have to make an inference of to look at your audience. It would be after you release an episode, look at your information, your data after 7 days, 15, and 30. And the 7-day and 30 days after you release your episode, that one episode, look at what those numbers are. And that's how you gauge your audience, if you will, like an
Who's
average.
listening
of
when?
what that is.
Are they grabbing it in the first 7 days, or are they more, a few weeks down the line kind of thing?
Correct.
Gotcha.
Correct.
That's super handy. Yeah, that's a total trip when you're first starting out and you are going to these different outlets and you're like, wow, I had 3 listens on Apple Podcasts or something like that. But then you go back to your media distributor, your Libsyn, and you're like, wow, I can, people are really tuning in. And you can see this like nice little pie chart. So are there things that people should really latch onto and dive into so that they can start seeing a change? Or if there's something missing that they can kind of put the gas on to fix it,
to
or
be able to do that.
Yeah.
Like there are a couple of things. One of them, just make sure that your subject matter is very clear for somebody who is searching your podcast. So let's say you are some kind of fan podcast that really loves like the lore of a specific book series or movie franchise or whatever. Try not to get cute with titling your show. I mean, you could, but have that be the lead and then say the official, the unofficial, or a podcast about Game of Thrones. Right. That just came into mind. So that you add the actual Game of Thrones aspect of it instead of whatever only the people in the know. But no, because nobody. Like I think that there was one that was called, for those Game of Thrones people, I haven't listened to a long time. Mind you, I haven't been in it, but there was one that was called Davos Ear. That was the name of the podcast. And like that was like a thing that happened in Game of Thrones. But nobody's going to be searching for that as a name,
podcast,
right?
Yeah, maybe not so much.
No, because it's a very specific, but they said a Game of Thrones podcast. And so you would find it based on that, but not based on the other stuff. So you have to make sure that is very important. The second thing is that your podcast episode titles also need to really be clear about the leading thing that is the most searchable about your episode. So if it is like a super famous person that everybody's finding out about, put that person's name on the front. Yes. Yeah. But if it's like somebody nobody's ever heard of, not to say that they're not fancy and they shouldn't be heard of, but maybe they're like super famous about, I don't know, medical insurance. I'm not joking, because it could be a thing. And then somebody's like looking up like, top tips on, how to save on medical insurance in 2024. Like make that the title of the episode with whatever the person's name is, right? So you lead with that because people are going to be searching for that. You've got to make sure that happens because they're going to be searching inside of Apple Podcast and Spotify, not for your podcast usually. They're going to be searching for
the topic of.
Something along those lines.
That's something too. AI kind of freaks me out a little. It's very new, but there are some tools that can help you generate search engine optimized keywords to use in your descriptions, in your titles, in your episodes. So explore that. I'm just going to say that slippery slope, because then that'll help kind of hone in on what people are already searching for, so that you're not keeping it too niche and you're kind of reach those people that want to consume your content that didn't even know they wanted to yet. It'll serve it up.
The other thing that I would say, is make friends with other people who are in your niche of that you are, doing your podcast with, whatever. And communicate with them, send them voice feedback. That's something that I do on my show. If you ever have any voice feedback, you can send voice feedback to me, meaning saying things like, I don't know what I just saw you do a webinar with Shure, and you were talking about a specific podcast, some data. Can you tell me more about that? And then we'll play it on our show because it's a podcast about podcasting. And then you can close out that thing and say like, hi, this is whatever from X podcast. We give you promotion based on that stuff. Being a guest on other people's podcasts, that is
huge.
Part of your niche is like, it actually does really very, very much work because people are already listening to the podcasts. And so you don't have to break that barrier.
No, it's crowdsourcing. Hey, my friend Elsie rocks. I'm going to bring her on here. And then hopefully some of you will look at this next slide that Cheryl's going to throw up that has her information so that you can find her and, get some more resources that we have available to you. And then you can follow Elsie and learn more about Libsyn. And then some of the topics that are on there, because we are, I can't believe, almost at the top of the hour, and I want to make sure we leave time for questions.
Yeah.
There are some really great Shure resources available too, which Louder Magazine is a content page on Shure.com that has a podcast that we do I don't know what the cadence is. I should know this. But it's great. And we have incredible guests that we bring on there, and we hear stories from the field, from musicians, from producers, from creators, and you get kind of a really in-depth look. So that is just a fantastic thing to explore. And Louder Magazine, that article that Cheryl just posted in the chat, gives you some in-depth tips on what we talked about when we were talking about microphones. So tips and tricks, microphone basics like dynamic cardioid or dynamic and condenser, all that fun stuff. And then there's another article about how to produce a podcast from home. There's a whole series of videos about that too over on our Shure Creators channel. And then a series that my team and I produce called How Do You Do That? So anytime you think, how do I record my podcast from home? How do I start live streaming? You can type that in and we have a video for that. So yeah, some resources at your fingertips. And then you have to find and connect with Elsie.
And I put all of those links in the chat. So if you open up the chat window, you can copy and paste whatever you need, because I know sometimes these slides aren't the most friendly for that kind of opportunity.
Right.
No worries.
Yeah, they don't link so well when you're in a webinar. Any questions that we can answer, Cheryl?
We do have just a couple of questions, so let's dive right in. First question, both of these are gear related. The first one is, can you talk about some sort of cloud booster or, that kind of thing when using XLR microphones? Are they worth it? Sort of when and where would you need to deploy something like a cloud lifter or, an inline preamp?
That is a fantastic question, which leads me to the mic that I wanted to talk about and didn't get to earlier, which is the SM7B and the SM7DB, which is what Cheryl is using right now. So when you would use a cloud lifter or an inline booster is when you have a microphone that needs more gain in order to be heard and picked up effectively without introducing noise into your mix. Noise like a hiss, not like noise of the room necessarily. So our beautiful SM7B that's been around since 1973, and it's an incredible piece of gear, needs a lot of gain, about 60 dB to be precise. So you could use an inline preamp, or you can use an interface that has enough makeup gain to provide that gain to your SM7B. So if you have an interface that can do that, and there's certain out there, then that'll work. But if you need something, if you're not getting enough, if your voice is too quiet when you're using your SM7B, then you would want to use an inline pre, or get the SM7DB, which has a built-in preamp. It also has tactile switches right on the back so that you can adjust the frequency response curves, which on my SM7B, I need a pen or a little paper clip to get in there to adjust it. You can also engage that preamp on the back and do plus 18 or plus 28. And you can also bypass it. So bypassing that circuitry makes your SM7DB turn back into an SM7B. That is the exact same microphone as this one here. It just has an onboard preamp, making it about a 1/4 inch longer or a centimeter longer, depending where you are. And it's black instead of this gray color and has a slight muted Shure logo. So you would use that inline pre if you don't have enough gain for your existing microphone, and there are others that need it. It's not just the SM7B. So if you're too quiet and you're hearing too much hiss and too much noise on your recordings, consider getting an inline booster.
And the only way to know that,
XT.
yeah, that's right. That little
MBX2U, yes.
But you do have to test it, though. You have to make sure that you do a couple of recordings, set yourself up, listen back, and then see, oh my gosh, I'm so loud. I mean, I'm so low and there's so much noise. And then you have to make a choice. And that's when you start to know when to put an inline in there for you.
Yes.
I have this little guy too, my little cloud booster. That is, I love it. Like as of right now, I don't really need it, but I do have it because it has been fundamentally important in a couple of situations where I really needed to get a little bit more.
Mhm.
Not-
More. Yes. But that will do that. And the MVX2U, that is actually what it's for as well. This will drive an SM7B, and you just plug the XLR into this and you're good to go. So this is a great little piece of kit,
I
and
love that
USB-C.
thing. It's so cool.
Looks like it was
Yep.
made to be there.
It's like we designed it that way or something. I don't know. Call us crazy.
All right, so you touched on this a little bit early in the gear section, Laura and Elsie, but this person joined a little bit late, and I think it maybe deserves a little bit of an extra discussion anyway. This person is taking their video cast from 3-host remote to all in studio together. Is it a good idea to use my MV7 for MV7s for all of us using a USB puck, or do I need to spring for SM7Bs with MVX2Us?
Oh, this is such a great question. And yes, Elsie spoke to that one directly as well. You have some options. With a Mac, you can create an aggregate device and have 2 USB mics going in, but 3, no. Do not run into a puck. I don't even want to think about that. You would need to go into an audio interface. And if you already have MV7s, you already have an XLR microphone. So you would just grab 3 XLR cables and get the interface that can support 3 channels. And there's many, many out there. And that's what you need, because that's going to block out noise. It has voice isolation technology. It's going to have all 3 of you can be sitting next to one another. It's not going to pick up as much of the bleed as a condenser would. And you can plug directly into the interface and then run that interface into the computer.
It's the perfect case example and study of why the MV7 is such a versatile microphone. You can grow with it. Was working great for USB. Now you're moving to that in-person situation. You just start using the XLR instead, and you're good to go. All right.
Yeah, you do. But you do. That's exactly what I would say. Is you do need to have a USB interface in there. But I mean, and USB as in like it would also connect it to your computer, and or if you don't want to have it going directly into the computer, to have it record directly on device as well. So it could be a digital recorder. I often traveled with a Zoom H6. Is that no the H? I don't even remember. Is it H? Yeah, the H6. Oh my God, I haven't taken it out in a long time. And it's got 4 little XLR inputs on the sides. And I recorded so many of our podcast episodes when we were live at conferences. We would go in one of the hotel rooms, and there was usually 4 of us there because it wasn't just my co-host and I. And we would just sit like in the hotel room on a couple chairs, put the H6 in the middle. All of us were hand holding our little mics, and it was great because it was separate tracks. Obviously, I would have to then transfer that data into my computer and do all the editing there, but super simple, very light, something to consider.
Awesome.
So we've given you a ton of information. If you have any other questions, please reach out and connect with us. We're happy to help you. Shure.com. What is the link?
Shure.com/contact is where you can go to open up a ticket with our support team. We have a fantastic team that are primarily there to help you out, answer your questions, troubleshoot your setups. Shure.com/contact. I think it's just a great place to go. So please open up a ticket there if you have any questions. We're going to take 2 last questions here because we're running up against time. And I'm going to answer this next one. Is there a company that does custom colors on the mics? Yes, for specific mics. Laura actually has one right there. Colorware is one of our dealers, and they do custom color versions of the MV7 and the SM7B. Have they? I think that's the only 2. Oh, and the SM58. Yeah. So lots of great colors, lots of cool options.
SM58 too?
That was the first one. Yeah.
Oh my God, I'm gonna have to do that just because it's like a great road mic to, on the go.
OG. Yes.
All right, and then just this one last question, which I think is great, and kind of a different question about a different way to get ready for your podcast. Do you believe that there's value in voice training and/or vocal warm-ups?
Oh, absolutely.
That's Yes. And you're speaking to two people who, I mean, one of them sings, the other one does not sing, but one
Cheryl
did
does
sing
too.
a song out loud. And you too. Oh my God.
Yep.
So yes, I do. You go, Laura. You go answer that. For
Oh,
her.
yeah, absolutely. Hydration is super important. I have a giant jug of water right here, ready to go. And yes, vocal warm-ups. When you're podcasting, it's so easy to zog like this and get into like vocal fry. Don't do that. You have to support your voice. And when I say support your voice, I mean support it with air. Take a breath. Don't speak to the end of a sentence. Because if you're batch recording, which is another great tool to lighten the load, that means you're recording episode after episode after episode. You're going to be tired and your voice is not going to sound as delightfully warm. So yeah, do some warm-ups. There's some good ones you can do to get your lips going, your mouth going, and hydrate so you don't have mouth noise as much. That will alleviate it.
Laura,
Yeah,
I think you and I could do a full hour
Totally.
on vocal.
I will add one last thing is the standing up aspect of it. I know that for me, being able to have the option of sitting and or standing, and I do it just with the boom arm. I just move it up and down depending upon what I want. Because it's sometimes when I'm tired and I really need to like get into my body, it's easier to really make my voice sound better and much richer with a lot more qualities of excitement or whatever when I'm standing up to be able to do that. Because when you're sitting, you're like Laura mentioned, the energy is like,
yeah. And you collapse on your physical instrument, which is your voice and your lungs and your diaphragm. And listen to Elsie because she is a yogi as well. She's a yoga instructor goddess.
You both just made me sit up a little bit. I was like, oh, I'm hunching. I better sit up. All right.
I'm not doing, I know my standing desk. I'm not using it right now. I feel very inadequate. I'm going to do that. I'm going to go for a walk.
Well, we've gotten through all our questions and we're definitely at the top of the hour, but thank you so much to Elsie for all of your insight and information. This has been a fantastic session. Thanks, Laura, once again for helping guide the ship here. And thank all of you for joining us. And we hope to see you on our next one. Remember, shure.com/webinars. This will be available in about a week, and all of our upcoming are listed there as well. So have a great day, everybody.